Joining us now on the Megacast is Frankie Bagdade. She is from FAAB Consulting and an author as well. Frankie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate having you on. So you are a clinical social worker as well as a therapist. What are some of the areas that you specialize in within that field?
So I specialize in ADHD, anxiety, children, teens, and adults who struggle with emotional regulation, which can be sensory sensitivities, being easily overwhelmed, anxiety, and parenting support.
And so as we get back into the thick of going back to school, and as we're really getting close to the beginning of the school year for so many kids next week, what are some of the main focus areas as we head back to school that tend to be sticking points for children that are afflicted with ADHD?
So, yeah, it can be a complicated transition. One of the things I've been working with families on recently, and it always comes up in August, is simple tweaks to make things easier and be preventative in the classroom. So we all know those school supply lists that come in this time of year, and sometimes our kids want to go with us and they want their favorite characters and whatnot, but not all school supplies are created equal. I really work with kids and their parents to understand their own organizational style, how to work within their strengths and accommodate their weaknesses. So picking the right organizational tools and being physically ready, and then also having some backup plans if they're fidgety in class, if they're not used to sitting still, maybe having something in their hands. It's a quiet fidget to keep them busy. Making sure that their teachers understand what's most helpful to them in the classroom and also what they're awesome at, their strengths. So helping parents talk teacher, I call it. I also have a teaching degree, a master's in special education. So I always say I can see both sides of the puzzle. I'm a parent of three, and I've been that worried parent, and I've been that teacher as well.
And so as we're getting ready to go back to school, so we've been hearing in recent years so much, we've been hearing the buzzword neurodivergent. Can you define that for us and how neurodivergence also affects kids as they're going back into school in particular, in addition to the ways it affects them in their learning?
Yeah, of course. So I love this new movement to really focus on neurodiversity because what that means in simple terms is a difference in our brains and the way we think and process and approach life. And by focusing on it being a difference, we're not saying it's less than, it's not sort of that deficit model, but by understanding our differences and what works best for us when we're learning, we really see further success. And it plays in nicely to these beautiful things that teachers are already doing in the classroom about celebrating what makes us all unique. So there are many different sort of neuro diversities that we may see in the classroom, ADHD, a child struggling with anxiety, and there's lots of research showing how that can impact learning. It can actually change short-term memory and processing speed when our brain is consumed with worry, different kinds of learning disabilities, social struggles, and so on.
We're joined by Frankie Bagdade. She is a clinical social worker and a therapist joining us on the Megacast, talking about back to school, getting into some of the context of some of our kids that are going to be more heavily affected by going back to school than others, and the ways that we can help them ease into going back to school. Neurodivergence, it is so complicated, and there's so many different sub definitions within the definition of neurodivergence. So as educators, as well as parents, what should we be more aware of as we're going back to school, especially in the context of this year with it likely to be fully in person, but also with some of the anxieties that have been induced over the last few years of distance learning and with school safety issues, and also with COVID-19 continuing to still be a factor? How do we address that for each individual student while not necessarily affecting the entire classroom?
Yeah, that is a great question. And boy, can that be a challenge. As I said, I've been in education for 20 years. That was my first love, my first career before I became a therapist. And so I understand how complicated it can be to meet the diverse needs. And we're really in an unprecedented time. We've heard that word so much, and it fits the bill. So a lot of this, as parents and teachers, is just being aware that transitions are tough. They bring up all kinds of behavior and emotions in the best of times, and knowing that these are not typical times. Kids are going into school, and parents are sending their kids into school with different fears than they were a few years back. Yes, school violence is, it's on the media, it's out there, and it's being talked about by our kids and teens. And we're still, figuring out how to safely live with COVID-19 as much as we can. Also, we've had 3 now interrupted years of school. So all of that does pile up. It makes sense to think that our kids are behind somewhat in independent skills, organizational skills, and social skills. And part of the first step is just awareness, knowing that's going to be true. We're going to see really tired and cranky kids come home from school because it's a transition. Even those children who are counting down the days and they love school, and there's so many of them that do, are still going to go through a transition and be extra tired and show some behaviors. And in terms of neurodiversity, sometimes school is really the perfect setting for those whose brains work a little differently, because it can be very predictable and organized, and it can be just a wonderful environment for them. So how do we accommodate those who need accommodations while making sure we're supporting the whole classroom? A lot of teachers are doing wonderful things with choice. So helping kids and teens recognize how they learn and how they best present what they learn, and giving choice, and helping them to work together as a team, knowing their different strengths and weaknesses. So I always say that whatever a teacher is doing in the classroom to maybe support the couple of students that they know have a disability, it ends up supporting the whole entire community by just bringing awareness to how we learn and what we need.
And so, Frankie, as with that in context for the teachers, what about for the parents as well? Because for many parents, they may not know that their kid is neurodivergent, that their kid has a learning disability until there's a diagnosis, and they may not understand what they should be looking for to maybe get their kids diagnosed. So let's start with that. What should they be looking for in their kids that may signal to them, I might want to get my kids checked out by a professional and see if maybe they have a neurodivergent condition that needs to be properly addressed so they can learn at their best rate, and also so that they're not so stressed out from the context of school or other situations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one I get asked quite a lot. I have parents reach out to me all the time saying, how do I know when my child needs therapy? Or how do I know when it's time to do an evaluation? And typically, my answer is, if you're asking yourself that a lot, I would go ahead. There's typically no downside to having a therapist, a nice relationship with someone, a great listener, really a professional listener for your child. And I find that a wonderful evaluation just gives us more information about our kids. We always say those kids don't come with instruction manuals. And having a different set of professional eyes on your child will help you understand them a bit better. I see parents get really nervous about diagnoses and labels and so on. And I get where that comes from, because we know who our kids are. We understand what makes them special. And we want to make sure that people still see that and not a label. We don't want them put inside the box. But when used correctly, it's just another piece of information, and understanding the way that child can be successful. It can be such a tremendous addition to really working with a kid in the classroom. So I always recommend, build that strong relationship with your child's teacher. Remember everything we've gone through as parents the last few years. Many of them are parents too, so they've had, a hard few years. They've been frontline workers in so many ways. So being empathetic and understanding of our teachers, working with them, helping out in the classroom if we can, if our schedule allows it, or even behind the scenes. When my child was in kindergarten and I was working full time, I volunteered to cut laminate at night and I sent it back the next day, and I was so happy to help. And, make sure they're on your team, work with them. And if they're concerned, do your best to check your defensiveness at the door and truly listen, because they have the gift of seeing our children within the context of all their same age peers, and they may notice things that we don't notice.
We're joined by Frankie Bagdade. She is a clinical social worker and a therapist with FAAB Consulting, and also an author, joining us on the Megacast. We want to talk about your book before we let you go today, Frankie. You wrote a book called I Love My Kids, but I Don't Always Like Them. It's being billed as the ultimate parent's survival guide. Tell us about what's in the book and what parents can learn by reading your book.
Yeah, I would love to. Okay, so here's my book, and I have my children on there, my little cover models. And the title in itself was so important to me because I found myself thinking, here I am. I have a master's in education, a master's in clinical social work. I've, two higher level degrees in human behavior. And guess what? Parenting is still really, really challenging for me. And I make mistakes all of the time. And I wanted to be really honest and transparent about that, because if it's happening to me, it's happening to everybody else. So my background has always been in the classroom, working with kids who learn differently. And then I really started to get interested and involved in behavior. I worked at the overnight camp, and I really had an aha moment when my children started to enter elementary school and were past the toddler phase. And I realized that what was working for me professionally may work for me in my house. And I learned how to talk to my kids the way I was talking to my students and my campers, how to problem solve proactively with them, how to really give them the benefit of the doubt and see them as sometimes the expert on their own behavior, why they were struggling. And that's really what this book is about. There are a lot of anecdotes about my own children written with their permission. People always ask me that. They had veto power, and we took some things out. And also stories about different situations I worked through professionally, all with new names and mixed together sort of in a fable kind of way, with easy, actionable steps for parents who are frustrated with parenting.
Well, Frankie, we appreciate you joining us and appreciate you coming on. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.